house on Gallows Reach. The first sound was the sea screaming. It howled against the black cliffs like something alive, 1,000 hollow voices twisting through the jagged rocks. Then came the bell, one single mournful toll that drifted across the fog like the final heartbeat of a dying town. And through that churning gray veil rose the silhouette of the Harridan house, tall and skeletal, its windows glowing faintly like watchful, half-lidded eyes. Travelers who passed along the Gallows Reach coast said the house watched them too, that if you stared long enough the lights inside seemed to move, as if something unseen slid from window to window, tracking you until you vanished into the mist. Most people kept walking. Those who didn't were rarely seen again. The locals swore the house was cursed, though they never agreed on how. Some whispered about buried gold and blood feuds, others about secret rooms and shrieks heard beneath the floorboards during storms. But the oldest fishermen told a darker tale, one they only spoke of after too much rum, when the lamps were low and the sea was gnawing at the docks. They said the house had been raised by two siblings, Eliza and Bram Harridan, who came from nowhere and brought ruin in their wake. And they said the siblings had married each other, not for love, not even for lust, for power. The rise of the Harridans, Eliza and Bram, first arrived in Wickmere in the spring of 1802, when the town still smelled of tar and whale oil, and the cobblestones sweated salt in the morning. They disembarked from a battered schooner with no crew, only an iron trunk so heavy it took 6 men to move. The town clerk remembered their clothes, fine London tailoring in a place where most men wore wool and patches, and their faces, eerily similar. The same ash-pale skin, the same high angular cheekbones, the same strange green eyes that seemed to glitter like broken glass in low light. They rented the old gallows land on the cliff, the place where pirates once dangled from ropes until the gulls picked their bones clean. No one else wanted it. Too much history in the soil, they said. But the Harridans built there, hauling black granite blocks up the cliff by hand, never speaking to neighbors, never tiring, as if the work itself fed them. And then the deaths began. At first it was small, a sick cow, a failed harvest, a child disappearing near the cliff's edge. Bad luck, people muttered. This coast had always been hard. But misfortune sharpened into something deliberate when the Harridans started buying up the ruined properties for a pittance. They seemed to know when tragedy would strike, arriving at auctions before the death notices were dry. Within 5 years they owned half of Wickmere's fisheries, 3 warehouses, and nearly all of the cliffside property. But wealth wasn't enough. Eliza studied inheritance law. Bram bribed judges. They learned how easily fortunes could be undone by marriage or misfiled wills, how fragile power became when mingled with outsiders' blood. And so in 1807, the two stood in the candle-lit cellar of their new-built house and made vows, not of love, but of permanence. They wed each other in secret, sealing their fortune behind bloodlines as thick and unbroken as iron chains. If the gods noticed, they said nothing. But something else was listening. The children of Dusk Eliza's pregnancy in 1809 was whispered about long before her belly showed. Servants spoke of strange noises in the night, muffled thuds, water dripping where no pipes ran, the sound of many tiny things moving at once in the walls. Birds stopped nesting near the house. Dogs would not cross its threshold. When the twins came, they came on a night the moon went out. No one saw them but the midwife, and she ran screaming into the storm, coatless and barefoot, vanishing into the heather. What scraps of her testimony were recovered later came from delirious mutterings as she lay dying of exposure, babbling about limbs like spider legs and faces that did not match from one moment to the next. Eliza claimed the midwife had gone mad from drink. Bram quietly had her body buried in unconsecrated ground. They named the children Cassian and Celine. They kept them hidden. Years passed. The Harridans' wealth swelled obscenely, but no child was ever seen at the house. Curtains stayed drawn. Deliveries were left at the gate. The only hint that children existed came from eerie sounds during storms. Faint, high voices weaving through the wind, sometimes laughing, sometimes screaming, always echoing as if from very far below. Until one night, a candle appeared in the highest window of Harridan House. It burned green. Cracks in the stone by 1817. Wickmere had become more a fiefdom than a town. The Harridans owned its docks, its courts, its very church bell. Bram was the unspoken magistrate, Eliza the shadow banker. and anyone who challenged them seemed to wither overnight. Businesses collapsing, ships vanishing, families ruined. But whispers about their hidden children grew. Servants claimed to see figures slithering in the corridors, neither walking nor crawling, their limbs bending wrong, their shadows not matching their shapes. One maid described soft voices chanting in perfect harmony from behind the nursery door, though the room was supposed to be locked and empty. Then came the stonemason. Elias Wren had been hired to repair cracks in the cliff beneath the house. On a cloudless noon he rappelled down the granite face with his tools, and never returned. Only his rope came back up, frayed halfway through as if gnawed by teeth. Eliza told the town he had fallen into the sea. But 2 weeks later, the tide washed up his toolbox. The steel chisels inside were bent in half like lead. After that, even the gulls avoided the house. The woman in grey in the autumn of 1819. A stranger arrived on the evening packet from London. A pale woman in a grey traveling cloak who carried only a black valise and spoke with a physician's clipped precision. She called herself Dr. Hester Vale. She rented a room above the apothecary and spent her days asking quiet questions about the Harridans, the children, and the string of vanished servants. No one wanted to talk. But Dr. Vale had a way of looking at you that made the truth spill out like spoiled wine. Within weeks she had pieced together the outlines of something grotesque. Not just corruption or murder, but the suggestion that the Harridan twins were not merely deformed. They were changing. The doctor planned to confront Bram and Eliza on the winter solstice, when the tides were lowest and the cliffs accessible. But the night before she set out, her apothecary room was found empty. The bed unslept in, her valise gone. On her windowsill, pressed into the frost, was a handprint too small for an adult. And with 6 fingers. Into the walls by 1820, even the loyal townsfolk had begun to mutter. The Harridans rarely appeared in daylight. The windows of their house glowed at odd hours, flickering as if by lightning though no storms passed. And sometimes, when the sea was very still, you could hear a deep, rhythmic thumping from the cliffside, like a colossal heart buried in stone. One spring night, a group of drunken whalers crept to the house intending to break in and expose the truth. They never made it inside. Only one man returned, half mad, muttering about corridors that twisted in on themselves, stairs that led back to the same room, and soft hands brushing his face in the dark. When he finally slept, he never woke again. His body was whole. His bones were hollow. And from that night on, the cracks in the Harridan house began to bleed. And that, my brave listeners, is where our descent truly begins. Because the secret Eliza and Bram buried inside their house is not dead. It's still listening, waiting, hungry. The children beneath the floor. The first thing Elias noticed was that the house breathed. A long, low exhalation rolled through the corridor as he stepped inside, like the sigh of something ancient and very tired. The candle he held flickered backward toward the door as if pulled by invisible lungs. Then came the smell, copper and violets and something else. Something older, like wet earth that had never known sunlight. Behind him, the entry door clicked shut with delicate finality. Elias Stowe had been many things in his 32 years. Sailor, thief, occasional gravedigger. But he'd never called himself brave, which is why it unsettled him deeply that he had walked into Harridan House at all, knowing what the fishermen whispered about it, knowing that everyone who entered had either disappeared or returned. Hollow. But he had one reason the others didn't. A name, Dr. Hester Vale, the woman in the grey cloak who'd vanished here last winter, and the only person who had ever believed Elias's sister hadn't simply fallen from the cliffs. Dust and silence. The house was all angles and silence. The candlelight caught on carved banisters that twisted like knotted vines, on portraits whose subjects had their eyes scratched out, on a massive grandfather clock that ticked backward. Dust hung motionless in the air as if even time refused to move here. Somewhere above, something skittered quickly and then stopped. Elias climbed the main staircase, each step groaning like a reluctant witness. The air grew colder. A faint rhythm trembled through the floorboards. Thump, 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 as if the house had a heart buried deep in its foundation. Halfway up, he saw the first message. It was carved into the wall with something sharp, hidden behind a hanging tapestry. Just 2 words. We remember. The letters were too small for an adult's hand. yet too perfect for a child's, the nursery. That isn't, the nursery door was locked, but the lock crumbled like stale bread at Elias's touch. Inside, the air was thick, clotted with sweetness and decay. Toys lay scattered, carved from bone and painted with flaking gold leaf. A music box spun in the corner with no key, playing a lullaby that wasn't quite in any known scale. The notes almost words, but not. And on the walls, growths. Pale tissue-like webs clung to the plaster, pulsing gently in and out like gills. Elias reached out, then stopped when one of them turned toward him. It wasn't growing on the wall, it was the wall. The plaster swelled, split, and something thin and jointed slid back inside. Then a whisper, high, clear, and very close. "Are you her?" Elias spun. No one there, just his candle sputtering wildly in air that had gone suddenly hot. The crawl space. He found the door to the crawl space behind a wardrobe, small, square, with a rusted grate. A breath of icy air seeped from the cracks, carrying a sound like humming wires. He pried it open and descended on his hands and knees, the passage narrowing around him until the ceiling brushed his back. There, in the dark, he found the drawings, hundreds of them, scrawled in charcoal on the boards. They showed the house from impossible angles, staircases folding back into themselves, windows opening into mouths, corridors looping like intestines. And always two figures, stick-thin, jointed wrong, heads tilted inward, surrounded by a crown of black teeth. At the center of the drawings was a message in cramped, precise handwriting. "She is in the walls with us." His candle guttered, flame shrinking to a trembling pinprick. And from deep within the house came the unmistakable sound of a child laughing. Only, it echoed like many voices at once. The mirror room. The crawl space ended in a narrow stair that rose into a chamber lined entirely with cracked mirrors. Elias's reflection fractured into a dozen shards as he entered, each fragment moving a little out of sync. The room smelled faintly of milk and rot. At its center stood a rocking chair. It was rocking. Gently. By itself. A voice rippled through the glass, soft, sing-song and wrong in a way that made Elias's teeth ache. "Cassian says we mustn't break the guests, yet." The mirror behind him rippled as if something pressed against it from the other side. A pale hand, a small spidery 6 fingers raw, and slid across the surface and vanished. Then all the mirrors screamed. Every reflection opened its mouth at once, silent and wide, their jaws stretching until the glass cracked down the middle. And through those splintering mouths, Elias saw 2 children crouched upside down on the ceiling, watching him, the twins Cassian and Celine. They were not what he expected. Not quite human, not quite not. Their limbs bent like folded wire. Their faces flickered between ages, now infants, now old, now not even faces at all but masks of glimmering bone. Their eyes weren't, just swirling black pools with pinpricks of starlight swirling within like distant galaxies drowning. They smiled in perfect unison. "You're late," Celine whispered. Her voice came from behind his teeth. "We kept the heart beating for you," Cassian added, and the floor trembled. Elias stumbled back. His candle died. The room went dark. Yet he could still see them, glowing faintly from within as if lit by moonlight buried in flesh. Then Celine reached out one finger and pressed it to her lips. "Shh," she breathed. "She's listening," the walls groaned, and split open like a mouth. The heart of the house Elias woke to the sound of his own name being whispered by walls, not shouted, not called, whispered. Thousands of voices threading through the timber like silk threads, each syllable delicate as cobweb. He jerked upright only to find he hadn't been lying down. He was standing perfectly still in the mirror room, though his legs ached as if he'd been there for hours. The rocking chair no longer rocked. The twins were gone. Only the air moved, slow and damp, like the breath of something dreaming beneath the floor. The boards were warm under his boots, too warm. He realized with a cold ripple down his spine that the thumping he'd heard since entering the house was no trick of the tides. It was stronger now, rattling the picture frames, making the mirrors quiver in their cracked silver. Skins thump, paws thump, a heartbeat, and it was getting faster. The hallway that eats, the corridor, beyond the mirror room stretched on forever. Literally, Elias walked for what felt like 10 minutes. The wallpaper peeled in long weeping strips, revealing older wallpaper beneath, and older still under that, layers and layers going down into centuries, patterns of flowers, then harlequins, then jagged black symbols that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. No matter how far he walked, the mirror room door stayed visible behind him, hovering at the same distance, like a painting someone kept sliding along the wall. His breath clouded white. His fingertips were slick with sweat. Then softly the carpet beneath him sank. He froze. The floor pulsed once beneath his boots as if something massive shifted just below. The wallpaper bulged outward, and from within it, a human tooth dropped to the floor with a tiny, wet tick. Elias ran. The anatomy room. The endless hallway spat him into a vaulted chamber lit by swinging green lamps. Tables lined the walls cluttered with objects that should not have existed. Clocks with vanes, dolls that blinked sideways, books sewn shut with copper wire. And at the center, the table. On it lay a shape roughly the size of a human torso, though it writhed subtly, like dough trying to remember it used to be alive. Thick black fluid pulsed through glass tubes running into the walls. Above it hung a brass placard etched with one word, seedling. Elias swallowed bile. Pinned to the wall above the table were dozens of notes written in two different hands. One slanted and precise, Eliza's, the other jagged and impatient, Bram's. He skimmed them, his eyes snagging on phrases. Accelerated tissue convergence. Requires harmonic stimulus from the twins' voices. Heart mass expanding faster than frame can contain. She is nearly ready. A wet sound slid through the air. The torso thing had opened a single eye. It was green. And it was smiling. The vein. A door sagged open at the chamber's far end, revealing a spiral stair carved straight into the stone foundations. The walls glistened. Threads of dark liquid slithered down the steps, warm against Elias's hand as he steadied himself. The further he descended, the stronger the heartbeat grew, not just sound now but force pushing the air like waves. The lamps above flickered and went out. Bioluminescent fungi flared to life along the walls, painting everything in cold blue light. Then he saw them. Drawings scratched into the rock by small hands, Cassian and Celine again, stick-thin and haloed with black teeth. But here they were inside something. Something circular, vast. Their arms were sunk into it up to the shoulders, and the thing smiled around them with 1,000 mouths. A final message scrawled beneath, so small he had to crouch to read it. We grew her for them. The heartbeat thundered once so hard that dust rained from the ceiling. The chamber of ribs, a stair disgorged him into a cavern that could not possibly fit beneath the house, a hollow as big as a cathedral. The walls curved like the inside of a skull, and at its center, the heart. It floated, suspended in a lattice of black bone ribs bigger than a carriage, swollen and veined with glimmering green light. It beat lazily, each contraction sending waves through the oily pool below. The smell was cloying and sweet, like overripe fruit left in a tomb. Something moved along the bone lattice. Thin, pale shapes scuttling like insects. The twins, Cassian and Celine, were singing. Their voices wove together in impossible harmonies, bending the air, making the green veins blaze brighter. The heart shuddered with pleasure. Elias pressed himself into the shadows, heart hammering. The twins' song rose, shrill and ecstatic. The heart convulsed. A seam split down its center, and something inside began to push. The revelation, what came out, was not born. It remembered itself. A shape uncoiled from within the heart, tall and jointed, its skin patterned like the house's wallpaper, its face a smooth, pale oval with no features, except two green eyes that opened all at once. They were Eliza's eyes. The thing turned its head slowly like a newborn learning gravity. The twins dropped from the bone lattice and crawled toward it on all 6 limbs each, chittering softly. The creature lowered its featureless face to them, and a slit opened where its mouth should have been. "Children," it said, in Eliza's voice, "bring me the rest of me." And from far above, somewhere in the bones of the house, every door slammed shut at once. The bones that remember, the new thing stood in the cradle of black ribs, glistening, swaying, and very still. Elias could not move, could not breathe. It wasn't just that it wore Eliza's eyes. It was that it knew they were hers. When its gaze swept across the cavern, memories slammed into him. Eliza laughing in the salt spray, Eliza coughing blood on the dock planks. Eliza's hand clutching his when she whispered, "Find out why the sea took her." Now those eyes stared out of something that had never known sunlight, and it smiled. Not with lips. It had none. It smiled by rippling the entire chamber like a pond hit by a stone. The ribs shuddered, the green veins pulsed, and Elias's teeth hummed in his skull like struck tuning forks. Then it spoke again, though its mouth didn't move. "We remember our skin." The museum of teeth, the twins scuttled down from the ribs, giggling, their voices overlapping like broken music boxes. They dragged something behind them, a heavy wooden trunk with tarnished brass clasps. It thudded across the cavern floor like a coffin being reluctant. "Time for gifts," Cassian sang. "For her birthday," Celine hissed. They cracked open the trunk. Inside were teeth, hundreds, some human, some not, sorted by size, each labeled with neat script on yellowing parchment. Elias glimpsed names he knew from the missing persons broadsheets: sailors, orphans, the parish choir that had taken ill. The twins began pushing the teeth one by one into the creature's palms. It absorbed them without chewing, without swallowing. The teeth simply sank into its flesh, leaving no mark. It grew taller, straighter, more familiar. Elias gagged, bile stinging his throat. Those teeth. Eliza had collected teeth from the drowned. For study, she said it was just superstition, just debris the tide spat back. Had she been feeding the house all along? The house speaks, the walls trembled. Plaster flaked like dead skin. Words blossomed across the curved cavern ceiling in black mold, curling letter by letter as if invisible hands were writing them from the inside. "We were here before your names. You built us from your dead. We keep what you leave behind." Elias stumbled back. His boot splashed into the black pool. It was warm as blood. The creature's green eyes flared. Its shadow stretched impossibly long, racing up the walls until it touched the ceiling and merged with the words. "Bring me my bones," it whispered. The house groaned in delight. Somewhere above, a bell tolled, deep, distorted, as if rung underwater. The entire floor shifted, angling upward like a living tongue. A stairway unfurled from the wall in jerky convulsions, each step forming from bone erupting through plaster. Cassian grinned, his jaws opening too wide. "Time to climb," Celine clapped her hands, and more teeth spilled from her sleeves like coins. "Time to remember." The upstairs, that isn't the bone stair, carried them not up, but sideways, through the walls, through layers of rooms that were less rooms than memories of rooms. Elias glimpsed fragments flickering past. His childhood bedroom, his mother's kitchen, the boatyard, all distorted, all dripping with black mold. The house was copying him, rebuilding his life from scraps it had taken while he slept. At the landing stood a door marked in red chalk. "Memento Vita," Cassian pressed his palm to it. The door side open. Inside, the air reeked of lavender and seawater and iron. Rows of mannequins stood in a circle, each wearing a piece of clothing Elias recognized. Eliza's raincoat, his sister's scarf, the constable's boots. Their faces were blurred wax. Their hands were skeletal and flexing faintly as though dreaming of work. Celine whispered, "She's almost done." Elias whispered back before he could stop himself, "Who?" And the mannequins all turned their heads toward him at once. The bone orchard. They burst into the next chamber running. Roots coiled up from the floor. No, not roots, femurs, tibias, rib cages sprouting like white ivy. The walls were packed with skulls mortared in place, each with names burned into the brow. The green-eyed creature glided behind them, taller now, limbs lengthening like drawn wire. Its footsteps made no sound. Its shadow crawled ahead of it on the ceiling, snuffing the lantern fungi with each glide. "Almost enough," Cassian sang. "Just the last bone," Celine echoed. Elias tripped over something half buried in the marrow dust. He brushed it off and froze. A skull, Eliza's. Her name scorched across the forehead. A crack split its crown, and inside the crack something moved. A glimmering black seed pulsing faintly. The creature loomed close, green eyes blazing. It knelt, extended one long finger toward the skull. "Bring me the rest of me," it whispered again, and the seed inside Eliza's skull opened its eye. The archive of flesh, the me. Seed in Eliza's skull opened like an eyelid. Slick and silent, inside was not an eye, not exactly. It was a whirl, a spinning pupil of dark glass threaded with green lightning. And when it looked at Elias, he remembered drowning. Not actually drowning, not water or lungs or cold. Just the feeling of being accepted by something vast and indifferent. A tide with arms. A mouth that didn't bite, just included. Eliza had said once. The sea doesn't kill. It keeps, he hadn't understood. Until now. The seed blinked and the bone orchard went still. Even the twins froze, their heads cocked at an identical angle, mouths faintly open like dolls waiting for a string to be pulled. Then the walls rippled, and the house spoke. The memory chorus, it wasn't words at first, just layers of breathing, in and out, dozens of rhythms merging into one slow tide. Then voices, hundreds, whispering over each other like paper tearing. Eliza Vale. Salt-blooded, bright-struck, our mother. Bring us her threads. Cassian dropped to all 6 limbs, trembling in delight. She is coming back. Celine sang, soft as spider silk. She only needs her echoes. The green-eyed creature drifted forward, taller now than the ceiling, its head brushing the rafters that hadn't been there a moment ago, ribs folded out of the walls to frame it like cathedral arches. It held out its hand to Elias. Its palm was full of black pins, each tipped with a single drop of green fire. Give me your echo, it said. The spindle room, they herded him into the next chamber, which might once have been a dining hall. Long tables sagged under mountains of pale threads, thin as hair, each labeled with a brass tag stamped with names. Constable Breen, Mara Stowe, Reverend Holt. Threads stretched from the piles up into the ceiling, where shapes hung like cocoons, vague human silhouettes twitching gently. The air smelled of burnt sugar and salt brine. Selene pressed her palm to a thread labeled Mara Stowe. It pulsed green. A memory bled from it, hanging in the air like smoke. A girl with wind-wrecked hair laughing on a cliff's edge. Elias's knees buckled. His sister. She is already inside, Cassian murmured. But you are still loose. The creature moved among the tables, its fingers brushing the threads. Wherever it touched, the memories flared. Fragments of people Elias had known, loved, feared. They spun around him like ghosts, not quite seeing him, not quite gone. All who touch her become her. The house whispered. And she will not be small again. The Mark Elias tried to run. The floor leaned to catch him. Cassian leapt from the table, knocking him flat with impossible strength. Celine pinned his wrists, her fingers jointed backward, bending like sickle blades. They hummed, low and harmonic like tuning forks. The creature crouched, head tilting, its green eyes boiling. We kept your grief warm, it murmured. Now give it back. It drove a black pin into his sternum. Elias screamed, not from pain. There was none. But because he felt something being pulled out of him. A thread, invisible and endless, unwinding from behind his eyes. Memory, self, shape, images ripped loose. His first stolen coin, the smell of the sea, Eliza laughing in a storm. They bled out of him in vaporous strands. The creature drank them, its body shivering in delight. When it was done, Elias lay hollow as a bell, and very quietly, he could hear something walking in his place. The flood of faces. The walls tore open. Hundreds of faces pressed out from the plaster, stretching it like wet cloth. Faces of the missing. Eyes rolled, mouths worked silently, teeth clicked like type bars. Their cheeks were stitched to the house by black threads, their lips mouthing fragments of lives they no longer owned. The creature rose over them, swelling taller with each echo it consumed. Its skin was no longer pale. It writhed, patterns crawling under it like storms seen from orbit. Cassian and Celine knelt, foreheads to the floor, shivering in worship. Almost full, they crooned together. Almost whole. The seed inside Eliza's skull pulsed bright. Once, twice, like a heartbeat trying to restart. The house whispered. With 1,000 mouths opening in the walls, just the heart left. And Elias realized with sick clarity what that meant. They weren't going to take his memories. They were going to take him, literally, his heart. The extraction chair, they dragged him to the far end of the spindle room where a throne of black bone waited. Straps of glistening sinew snaked from its arms, coiling eagerly as he struggled. Cassian whispered, "She wore your heartbeat for years." Celine smiled, eyes glittering like cracked emeralds. She'll wear it again. The creature's mouth slid open, wide and wet, and inside was not a throat but a spiral stare of teeth. It leaned close, green light searing. You beat where she cannot, it said, the straps tightened. The throne hummed. The walls began to close like lungs, pushing the air toward that waiting spiral. Elias thrashed once, twice, and then felt his chest open, not physically, not bleeding, worse. The sound of his own heartbeat was rising from outside his body, circling the room like a hunting animal, and he watched in cold horror as a shape uncoiled from his ribcage, dripping light. His heart. Walking. The last echo. His heart scuttled across the bone floor like a pale crab. Its arteries writhing, shedding threads of green light. The creature waited, tall enough now to brush the curved ceiling, its Eliza eyes glowing like drowned lanterns. Its voice rolled through the chamber in soft waves. Come home, heartbeat. Bring me back to I. The twins were already dancing, silent, weightless, their feet not touching the ground. Each turn unwound black threads from their spines which coiled into the creature's hands. It grew broader, warmer, human-shaped. Elias lay slack in the bone throne, hollow, soundless. Until he noticed something. His breath still steamed. His body still lived, even emptied, which meant maybe, just maybe, he could put something else inside it. The lantern of ash, he focused on the gap where his heart had been. It was cold but not empty. There was still a spark, deep and bitter. Not love, not hope refusal. He fed it Eliza's laugh. Her defiance. The way she'd spat in the undertaker's face when they tried to close her sister's coffin too soon. The spark flared, and the house noticed. The walls stiffened. The ceiling groaned. Faces sagged from the plaster like melting wax, muttering, No, stay hollow. Elias stood. The straps of sinew sloughed off him like rotted kelp. His legs trembled, but the spark held. It burned. It caught. He walked toward his scuttling heart. The bargain of blood. The heart froze halfway across the floor, quivering like a frightened animal. Elias knelt. Come back, he whispered. Not for her. For me, it hesitated, then pulsed once, and leapt. Agony tore through him as it slammed back into his chest, ribs cracking like dry twigs. He screamed as light burst from his eyes, his mouth, his scars. The twins shrieked. The creature reeled, its half-formed skin blistering in green fire. He is full, Cassian wailed. He is not yours anymore, Celine spat, and both dissolved into threads that whipped away like burned paper. The creature howled, not with pain, but hunger denied. It lunged. The collapse Elias ran straight at it. The house bent around them, walls folding like origami, ceilings collapsing into teeth. He dove beneath the creature's reaching arms and drove his burning hand into the cracked skull on the floor. Eliza's skull, still glowing with that black seed. The seed screamed. Light detonated out of it, black and green at once, the color of rotting stars. The seed shriveled. The skull crumbled, and the house convulsed. The creature shrieked, its Eliza eyes boiling, skin sloughing off in ribbons of mold and porcelain. The ribs split. The ceiling fell like shattering glass. The black pool surged up, devouring the floor. Elias grabbed a rib like a mast as the chamber buckled inward, collapsing into itself like a lung exhaling for the first and last time. Not your bones, he whispered into the storm. Not your name, and the house. Let go. The waking shore. He woke on the salt flats at dawn. No house. No twins, no creature. Just a crater rimmed with blackened bones, filling slowly with seawater. In his hands, Eliza's rain-soaked journal, unburned, unrotted. Its last page blank except for 6 words scrawled in fresh ink, still wet. We never belonged to death. He stared until the sun rose fully, bleaching the bones into dust. Then he stood, heart hammering, and walked toward the distant line of gulls and surf. Behind him, the tide reached the crater and hissed like something waking. Then it went still. The whisper years later. People swore they heard whispers when the tide receded from that shore. Not screams, not ghosts, just laughter. 2 voices, small and bright, playing in the foam. And if you press your ear to the sand on quiet nights, you can hear a heartbeat, steady, human, waiting. And that, my brave listener, ends the legend of Harridan House. It was never haunted. It was hungry. And Elias was the only one stubborn enough to burn its name out of the world before it could remember how to wear skin. Or maybe it's just sleeping. Either way, if you ever find a house with bones in the walls, don't open the door.